You're about to see an alternate view to prophecy. But trust me, it makes sense. It's time to think outside the box. This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Let's talk about it. It's hard to overcome the traditional views of prophecy. When I first presented our understanding of how everything gets cut short, I was mocked at by many. But now people are starting to see how the actual tribulation could be 1 year or less, and it makes sense with the rest of Scripture. Many times, when looking at Bible prophecy, it seems we try to place everything within the same timeline. Because, well, that's how it's always been considered. But today, that mold gets broken. In our previous prophecy teaching, the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the 70 weeks of Daniel, I presented how the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9 are 70 literal weeks. And I'll be sharing that same concept in this teaching as well. Also, in that teaching, we showed how the 70 weeks could end on the last day of Sukkot. In this teaching, we'll show how the 70 weeks are an independent time frame and could easily conclude in time for the first Passover in the millennium. In fact, though I consider the previous teaching to be very plausible, I believe this perspective fits what we're given in the prophets even better. As I continue to dwell on this possibility, the more it's making sense as something to be considered, and I can't get away from it. The perspective from the previous teaching presents the thought of a destruction to Jerusalem taking place first to bring in what the prophets declare to happen in the end times. In other words, a destruction to Jerusalem would happen in the time of the wars and rumors of wars, that being the event to trigger the declaration to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, thus the start of the 70 weeks and all of what's given in prophecy. However, in this teaching, I'm going to show how it's the actual prophesied destruction of Jerusalem that happens first, that being what we see in Ezekiel 8 and 9. Then, after that time of devastation, that's when the declaration to restore and rebuild Jerusalem takes place, and we see the 70 weeks of Daniel come to pass, showing the 70 weeks are a separate time frame from when it all begins. Plus, as noted in the previous teaching, the calendar we follow has a 1,290-day count from the first day of the year to the last day of Sukkot, 3.5 years later. This happens every year, perfectly matching what's given to Daniel in chapter 12. So, just as the previous teaching showed things lining up with biblical dates for this year, and for future repeating years because of the calendar, the view I'm sharing in this teaching carries similar patterns that point not only to this year, but in coming years ahead as well. So, if nothing happens this year, this scenario can repeat on different years just the same in a repeating manner. So, this isn't a one-time occurrence. This is a possibility to always be on the watch for. First, as noted by Yeshua, Jerusalem will be surrounded, and he warned those in Judea to flee. Why? Because of the destruction that's coming. And it appears the surrounding of Jerusalem is because of the Abomination of Desolation being set up. The event that Daniel 12 implies is the start of it all. As we discussed in our teaching on the subject, the Abomination of Desolation will be the sacrificial system restarting. Once the sacrificial system in Jerusalem has restarted, the Arab nations will immediately surround Jerusalem, placing it under siege. This siege is prophesied in Ezekiel chapter 4. In fact, this is the very prophecy Yeshua was referencing. The siege is said to be a sign for the northern kingdom. This will be the time for them to flee and wait for Yeshua to take them in the first resurrection for the marriage covenant at Shavuot. the time when Babylon gets destroyed. This is covered in our previous teaching, The Coming Destruction of Jerusalem and the 70 Weeks of Daniel. Sometime after the siege begins, the modern state of Israel will be invaded and all but completely wiped out. This invasion most likely begins on the 5th day of the 6th month, according to Ezekiel 8:1 and chapter 9, verses 5 through 6. This is also when the idol of jealousy is mentioned, which we believe to be the Ark of the Covenant. For more on this, you can see our teaching, What is the Idol of Jealousy? Now, if the invasion does indeed take place on the 5th day of the 6th month, this lets us know the Abomination of Desolation, that being the sacrificial system being restarted, has to be set up before this date. Most likely, making it set up on the 10th day of the 4th month, or the 9th or 10th day of the 5th month. Both of these would go in line with the fasts that are turned to feasts as given in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19. As noted in our teachings, Watching for That Day and Watch and Pray, we really don't know the order to when these 4 fasts are turned to feasts. The sequence in which they occurred with the Babylonian invasion actually started with the 10th month. That's when the city was surrounded. Then, 16 months later, the walls were broke through in the 4th month. The temple was burned down in the 5th month, and the event with Gedaliah in the 7th. But again, the order to how they get turned into feasts could be in any sequence. These days being turned to joyful feasts will most likely deal with the sacrifices being reinstated, the temple being rebuilt, and the stages of Jerusalem being restored. Now, when the invasion takes place, the world will look at the leader of the Arab nations surrounding Jerusalem as if he's the Antichrist. Why? Because he brings the sacrifices that were just restarted to an end. Those who hold to this view misunderstand Daniel chapter 9. Now, I'm not going to teach that again here. To learn more on how the world will be deceived by a false Islamic Antichrist, please see these teachings, The Assyrian, and Satan's Greatest Masquerade, Part 1 and 2. Now, back to the invasion. According to Ezekiel 4, the invasion lasts 40 days. Though they get all but wiped out, they end up winning the war by the end of those 40 days. But when this devastating war is over for the modern state of Israel, Ezekiel 5 shows this time of devastation will then spread to the northern kingdom. In fact, chapter 5 shows the order to what's given to us in chapter 4. And according to Ezekiel 4, it then lasts on the northern kingdom for 390 days. This will be the time when Babylon gets drunk on the blood of the saints, as noted before. But once that time of destruction on Jerusalem is over, the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem eventually takes place. It'll most likely happen during the cleanup from that war. I can easily see this decree come from the United Nations. So, instead of trying to force the 70 weeks to include the time of devastation on Jerusalem, this understanding shows that destruction described in the prophets is the event that ushers in those 70 literal weeks, giving the very reason for the decree to go forth. And those 70 literal weeks will end with everyone preparing for Passover in the millennium. We'll cover the specifics of the 70 weeks in a moment. Now, back to the 40-day invasion. If the invasion truly begins on the 5th day of the 6th month, as it would appear to be according to Ezekiel 8 and 9, the 40 days this war lasts will end the day before Sukkot, the 15th day of the 7th month. The 390 days then begin for the northern kingdom on the first day of Sukkot. This will be a time of intense persecution on the church. again, the time when Babylon gets drunk on the blood of the saints. As noted in the previous teaching, 390 days from the first day of Sukkot this year lands exactly on the last day of Sukkot of 2026. This day will be when those noted in Isaiah 66 go out to retrieve the survivors, and they begin their trek to Jerusalem. This is discussed in our teaching, the Second Exodus. And there Yeshua will be waiting for them to wrap up the 70 weeks, when he ushers in the first Passover in the kingdom for the millennium. While I confess the start of the 70 weeks doesn't have to be on a significant day, when counting from the 24th day of the 9th month of this year, the day we're told will be blessed from that day on in Haggai chapter 2, verse 18, we land precisely on the 10th day of the first month in 2027, the day the Lamb is selected for Passover, bringing the 70 weeks to a close just in time for Passover. And what did Yeshua say? He wouldn't drink of the cup again until we're in the kingdom, making the time for the 70 weeks to conclude at the time of Passover all the more significant. Now, we're given several specifics to the 70 weeks of Daniel. So, in wrapping things up, let's quickly look at those specifics and see what we come up with. Everything noted here either happens during the 70 weeks or comes as a result of the 70 weeks. First, we see to finish transgression. So, what does this mean? In light of Genesis 15:16, which says, "In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure," giving indication the Amorites wouldn't be removed until their sin had reached a certain level, thus its full measure. That being the case, to finish transgression here in Daniel 9 could mean this time is allotted for the modern state of Israel to reach their full measure of sin, thus to finish their time of transgression, which results in to put an end to sin. Then we see to atone for wickedness. This could very easily be referencing the Battle of Armageddon, which would start on the Day of Atonement, the day when the wicked are removed. So the Day of Atonement results in to atone for wickedness. And then we see to bring in everlasting righteousness, showing the 70 weeks close out with the starting of the millennium, the time when everlasting righteousness begins on earth. We then see to seal up vision and prophecy. My current thought on this is how it deals directly to the promise of Abraham, that being how all his descendants would be brought to and live in the land, the very promise given to Abraham. At the end of the 70 weeks, this promise will have been completed and being completed with those on the second Exodus. Thus, no more need for vision and prophecy in keeping this promise. And then we see to anoint the most holy. As noted in our previous teaching, this is talking specifically with the 7-day dedication of the altar, most likely taking place immediately after the Battle of Armageddon. So, the 70 weeks are specifically for all these events. And as shown in this teaching, the 70 weeks can easily be a separate time frame from when things literally start. While interpretations will vary, I pray you seriously consider this perspective and how the prophesied destruction of Jerusalem in Ezekiel will bring the declaration to rebuild and restore Jerusalem, thus making the 70 weeks of Daniel a completely separate time frame in the scope of the end times. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.